There are things worse than forgetting who you are. Sometimes, something else remembers for you. The nursing staff at Willowbrook Care Home had seen it all. Patients who wandered at night, calling for long-dead spouses. Others who became violent during sundown syndrome, their minds trapped between worlds. But Eleanor Vance was different. When she stared at you with those milky, cataract-clouded eyes, you felt something staring back. Something that was definitely not an 83-year-old grandmother. Eleanor had been admitted 6 months ago, her daughter Margaret tearfully explaining that Mom couldn't live alone anymore. The dementia had progressed rapidly. She'd left the stove on 3 times, wandered into neighbors' yards at midnight, convinced she was late for church, called Margaret by her dead sister's name. Standard deterioration, the doctors said. A mind slowly erasing itself, memories dissolving like sugar in rain. But by week 3, the staff noticed peculiarities. Eleanor would speak fluent Latin during her confused episodes. Not the church Latin she might have learned as a Catholic schoolgirl in the 1940s, but ancient dialects, guttural and harsh. When orderly Marcus tried to help her back to bed one night, she'd grabbed his wrist with impossible strength and whispered, "I know what you did to that boy in Atlanta. I can smell his fear in your sweat." Marcus had quit the next morning. He'd never told anyone about Atlanta, about the hit and run when he was 19, about the kid on the bicycle he'd left bleeding in the road. Night nurse Patricia began documenting the changes. Eleanor's handwriting transformed in her journal entries, switching mid-sentence from shaky, elderly script to confident, masculine strokes. She wrote in languages Patricia couldn't identify, drew symbols that made your eyes hurt if you looked too long. And her eyes. God, her eyes. They'd started changing color. Not the iris, that stayed the same faded blue. But something behind them seemed to shift, like shadows moving underwater. Dr. Reeves dismissed Patricia's concerns. Hallucinations were common with dementia patients. The aggression, the personality changes, the inappropriate behavior, all textbook Alzheimer's symptoms. He increased her medications. It made no difference. Margaret visited every Sunday, though the visits had become increasingly difficult. Her mother would be lucid for moments, tears streaming down her weathered face, apologizing for things Margaret didn't understand. Then the thing behind her eyes would surface, and Eleanor would smile with too many teeth, speaking in a voice like gravel sliding down a metal chute. "Your mother is dying, little Margaret. Piece by piece, memory by memory. And in the spaces where she used to be, I grow stronger. Soon there will be nothing left of Eleanor at all. Just me, wearing her skin like a comfortable coat." To understand what inhabited Eleanor Vance, you must first understand what Eleanor had been, before the dementia, before the sweet grandmother facade, before decades of church attendance and charity work had buried the truth. In 1959, Eleanor was Eleanor Hartwick, a 23-year-old nurse at Clearwater Psychiatric Hospital in rural Pennsylvania. The institution housed the state's most disturbed patients, locked away from a society that didn't know how to help them. Eleanor worked the night shift in Ward D, where the violent cases were kept. The pay was good, the work was easy, the patients were heavily sedated, and nobody asked questions about what happened after midnight. Eleanor had discovered something intoxicating about power over the helpless. She would reduce medications, watching patients spiral into terror and psychosis. She'd whisper things to the catatonic ones, cruel inventions about dead children and burning houses. She'd place objects in cells, gaslighting the paranoid into complete breaks from reality. Her favorite was Daniel Crowley, a schizophrenic who believed demons spoke through the walls. Eleanor would scratch messages into his cell floor while he slept. Biblical verses written backward, countdown numbers, descriptions of his family members, though he'd had no visitors in years. She watched him deteriorate, screaming about the demon that knew everything, that was always watching, that promised he'd never escape. Daniel hanged himself with a bedsheet in March of 1960. Eleanor felt nothing but mild disappointment. She'd lost her favorite toy, but there were always more patients, more vulnerable minds to torment, more power to exercise over those who couldn't fight back. She did this for 7 years, protected by institutional indifference and the era's casual cruelty toward the mentally ill. Nurses who noticed kept quiet. Doctors who suspected never investigated. The patients who tried to tell were already crazy. Who would believe them? Eleanor left Clearwater in 1966, not because she was caught, but because she'd gotten bored. She married Richard Vance, had a daughter, became the grandmother who baked cookies and volunteered at church. The past was buried, forgotten, or so she thought. But the universe has a peculiar sense of justice, and sometimes what we've done to others comes crawling back through the cracks in our breaking minds. The entity inhabiting Eleanor called itself Malphas, though names are meaningless things for beings older than language. It was a demon of psychological torment, a specialist in hopelessness and despair. While other demons traded in violence or temptation, Malphas fed on the exquisite suffering of minds trapped in their own private hells. For centuries, it had moved through history's shadows. Medieval dungeons where prisoners were driven mad by isolation. Plague ships where the dying begged for death. Battlefields where wounded soldiers lay forgotten. Anywhere humans were helpless, hopeless, and suffering, Malphas would be there, not to cause the pain, but to savor it, to amplify it, to make sure every second lasted an eternity. But Malphas had a particular appetite for certain souls, those who had tortured the vulnerable, those who had taken pleasure in others' psychological destruction. These souls carried a flavor, a resonance that drew Malphas like blood in water. Eleanor Vance had been glowing like a beacon for 60 years. Dementia provided the perfect doorway. As Eleanor's mind began to fracture, as her memories dissolved and her personality fragmented, small gaps appeared in her consciousness. Moments where she wasn't quite present. Spaces where something else could slip inside. Malphas didn't possess her all at once. That would have been too quick, too merciful. Instead, it moved in slowly, taking residence in her forgetting. Every memory Eleanor lost, Malphas claimed. Every piece of her that vanished, it replaced. And what Malphas found in Eleanor's mind was delicious. Buried memories of Clearwater, 60 years of suppressed guilt. The faces of patients she'd tormented, preserved in the sections of her brain the dementia hadn't reached yet. All that cruelty, all that casual sadism, locked away behind decades of suburban respectability. Malphas brought it all to the surface, made her remember every face, every scream, every patient who'd begged her to stop. Made her relive it with perfect clarity even as she forgot her daughter's name, her address, what year it was. The demon was showing Eleanor the same mercy she'd shown those patients. None at all. The parallels between Eleanor and Malphas were obvious, sickeningly perfect. Both had found their purpose in the suffering of the trapped and helpless. Both had operated in institutions designed to help, but twisted into places of torment. Both were predators who preferred psychological destruction to mere physical violence. Eleanor had tormented patients whose minds were already broken. Malphas was tormenting Eleanor through a mind that was breaking. The symmetry was so perfect, it almost seemed designed. But where Eleanor had been human, limited by mortality and opportunity, Malphas was ancient and patient. Where Eleanor had eventually stopped, grown bored, moved on to a normal life, Malphas never tired. This was its nature, its purpose, its eternal calling. In Eleanor's failing mind, predator and prey had become one. The nurse who had tormented the mentally ill was now experiencing her own endless psychological torture, delivered by a being that had perfected the craft over millennia. And as Eleanor disappeared, piece by piece, Malphas grew stronger, wearing her body like a glove, using her vocal cords to speak truths that broke the living. Back at Willowbrook, things were escalating. 3 more staff members had quit after Eleanor told them secrets, impossible things she couldn't have known. The medication doses that were being skimmed and sold. The patient who was being quietly euthanized by a doctor who thought she was being merciful. The administrator's embezzlement scheme. Eleanor, or rather Malphas, wearing Eleanor's face, would smile at them with grandmotherly warmth and describe their sins in perfect, devastating detail. Not threatening, not angry, just knowing. Always knowing. Dr. Reeves finally agreed to a psychiatric evaluation. The specialist, Dr. Samantha Chen, spent 3 hours with Eleanor. She emerged pale and shaking, her report barely coherent. Eleanor had described in perfect detail Dr. Chen's stillborn daughter, had offered sympathies in the baby's own voice, the voice Dr. Chen heard in her nightmares, had known the name Chen had secretly given her, the name she'd never told anyone. Doctor. Chen recommended immediate psychiatric hospitalization. Reeves refused. Where would they send her? Who would take an 83-year-old dementia patient? This was already the end of the line. Margaret stopped visiting. She told herself it was because Mom didn't recognize her anyway, that the visits were too upsetting, that she needed to take care of herself. But the truth was simpler. She was afraid. That thing wearing her mother's face terrified her in a way she couldn't articulate. The church sent Father Michael, a young priest barely 30, fresh from seminary, and eager to help. He'd read about demonic possession in textbooks, studied the Ritual Romanum, even attended a lecture on modern exorcism practices. He was completely unprepared. Eleanor was restrained to her bed when he arrived, not uncommon for violent dementia patients. She looked small and fragile, a tiny old woman drowning in hospital sheets. Then she opened her eyes, and Father Michael felt his faith waver. "Hello, little priest," she said in that wrong voice, the one that didn't match her face. "Come to save the poor old woman? How noble. How pointless." Father Michael began the prayers. Latin rolled off his tongue, words of protection and banishment. Eleanor laughed, a sound like wind through a cemetery. "Your Latin is terrible. Let me help." And she began to correct his pronunciation, offering tips in the voice of a patient teacher. When Father Michael tried to continue, she spoke over him, reciting the prayers backwards, forwards, in variations he'd never heard. "These rituals work on demons who take what isn't theirs, priest. I was invited. Every act of cruelty she committed, every patient she tormented, every soul she broke for fun, those were invitations written in suffering. I accepted. This is my house now." She gave it to me, one evil deed at a time. Father Michael tried for 3 hours. He used holy water. Eleanor licked it off her lips and smiled. He held up a crucifix. She kissed it and asked if he wanted it back. He invoked every saint he could remember. She told him their real histories, the sins the church had edited out, the darkness that lived in even the holiest humans. Finally, exhausted and defeated, Father Michael asked the question he'd been avoiding. "What are you?" "I am what feeds on people like her. I am the consequence that finally came due. I am what happens when the universe's patience runs out." Eleanor's face softened for just a moment, and he saw a glimpse of the real woman underneath, terrified and trapped. I am her punishment and her warning. Warning. Every nurse who reduces medications to make their job easier. Every caregiver who torments those who can't fight back. Every person who takes pleasure in the suffering of the helpless. I'm waiting. In the spaces where their minds will eventually crack. In the forgetting that comes for everyone. I'm patient. I'm always patient. And I always collect what's owed. Father Michael left and never came back. He left the priesthood 6 months later. Night nurse Patricia was the only one left who still cared. She'd seen too much, knew too much to just walk away. She began researching, digging into Eleanor's past. It took weeks, but she finally found it. Old newspaper archives from Clearwater Psychiatric Hospital, articles about the suspicious suicide rate in Ward D, witness statements from patients that had been dismissed, and one name that appeared in multiple complaints before the trail went cold: Nurse Eleanor Hartwick. Patricia confronted her, alone in Eleanor's room at 3 a.m. It was a mistake. "You figured it out," Eleanor said, and for a moment she sounded like herself, old and tired and deeply, profoundly sorry. "I thought I'd gotten away with it. Buried it so deep. But you can't bury things that deep. They're still there, Patricia, waiting, rotting, festering. What you did to those patients," Patricia started, "was unforgivable. I know. I remember now. It makes me remember. Every face, every name, every scream. I can't forget anymore, Patricia. Even when I forget my own name, I remember theirs. That's the torture. That's the point." The thing behind Eleanor's eyes surfaced, and the old woman's face twisted into something that had never been human. "She earned me, Patricia. Every patient she gaslit, every mind she broke for entertainment, every helpless soul she tormented because she could. She sent out invitations to the dark and I answered. This is cosmic justice. This is what she deserves." Patricia felt something break inside her. What about the people who have to watch? Her daughter? The staff? Collateral damage? Witnesses, warnings, take your pick. Eleanor's head tilted at an angle that shouldn't have been possible without breaking her neck. "Though if I'm honest, I don't care. I'm here for her. The rest of you are just scenery." Patricia ran. She submitted her resignation that morning. Eleanor Vance died 6 weeks later. The official cause was complications from advanced dementia, pneumonia, and heart failure. The unofficial truth was that there was simply nothing left. Malphas had consumed every memory, every personality fragment, every last piece of who Eleanor had been. When the demon finally left, there was no one left to die, just an empty shell that stopped breathing. Margaret arranged a small funeral. Few attended. The pastor gave a generic eulogy about a life well lived, because he didn't know the real story. Eleanor was buried next to Richard, her husband, under a headstone that called her beloved mother and grandmother. But 6 months later, the reports started. At Shady Oaks nursing home across town, an elderly man with Alzheimer's, speaking in impossible voices, telling staff their deepest secrets, his eyes changing, something ancient and patient moving behind them. The universe is large. The number of people who have tormented the helpless is larger, and Malphas is patient. So very, very patient. It's waiting in the forgetting, in the moments when your mind starts to slip, when memories dissolve and personality fragments, in the space between who you were and what you're becoming. It's checking the ledger, reviewing the accounts, seeing who's earned an invitation. The nurses at Willowbrook still talk about Eleanor sometimes, in hushed voices during night shifts. About the things she said, the truths she knew, the way her eyes looked when the demon was looking out. And sometimes, when they're caring for other dementia patients, they wonder. When old Mr. Patterson stares at the wall and mutters in languages he never learned. When Mrs. Delgado's personality shifts like a switch being flipped. When the sweet grandmother in room 12 suddenly knows things she shouldn't, speaks with a voice that doesn't match her face. They wonder if it's just dementia, just the tragic, natural dissolution of a human mind, or if something else has moved in. Something that's been waiting, something that was invited long ago by deeds done in darkness, to sins committed against those who couldn't fight back. They wonder if the forgetting is just the door opening, and what walks through it. Malphas doesn't possess everyone. Only those who've earned it. Only those who tortured the vulnerable, who found pleasure in the suffering of the helpless. It's selective, patient, fair in its own cosmic way. So, if you work with the elderly, the mentally ill, the disabled, the imprisoned, the powerless, remember this: they are not toys. They are not entertainment. They are not beneath you. They are human beings, and what you do to them matters. The universe keeps accounts. And sometimes, when your mind eventually begins to break, as all minds eventually do, something will be waiting in the spaces. Something that remembers every face you've forgotten you hurt. Something that specializes in hopelessness and despair. Something that's finally come to collect. The ghost in Grandma's eyes isn't Grandma anymore. It never was. It's the bill coming due. It's the consequence that waited decades but never forgot. It's the justice the world couldn't deliver being served by something older and more patient than human law. Eleanor Vance spent 7 years tormenting the helpless. She spent 60 years pretending she hadn't. She spent 6 months being reminded of every single face, every single scream, every single patient whose mind she'd broken for fun. The math seems about right. But the story doesn't end with Eleanor. It never ends. Right now, in nursing homes and hospitals and care facilities around the world, people are caring for the elderly and infirm. Most are kind, most are patient, most see the humanity in even the most deteriorated patients. But some don't. Some reduce medications to make their jobs easier. Some speak cruelly to people who can't remember the conversation 5 minutes later. Some take pleasure in small torments, small cruelties, exercising power over those who can't fight back. They think no one notices. They think it doesn't matter. They think they'll get away with it, and they do, for years, for decades, until their own minds begin to slip, until the forgetting starts, until gaps appear in their consciousness, little spaces where they're not quite present anymore. That's when Malphas checks the ledger. That's when the invitations are reviewed. That's when the patient ancient thing decides who's earned its attention. That's when the possession begins. Slow, deliberate, consuming memory by memory, piece by piece, making them remember the faces they forgot, making them relive every cruelty with perfect clarity even as they forget their own names. It's not random. It's not unfair. It's mathematics, cosmic accounting, the universe balancing the books. The ghost in Grandma's eyes is waiting. The question is, has it been waiting for you? Sweet dreams. Take care of the helpless. Remember their faces. Remember their names. Remember that they're human. Because something else will be remembering too. And unlike you, it never forgets.